The war between Ukraine and Russia began in the steppes of Eastern Europe, but over time, the effects of the war spread to much wider areas. Against Russia's occupation policies, almost all European countries gathered under one roof for the same purpose, especially in recent days. The north of Europe has started to pioneer this common goal with Finland's participation in NATO. The Scandinavian peninsula began to react much more harshly and jointly against Russia. This striking solidarity in the triangle of Sweden, Finland, and Norway created a bombshell effect with Norway's last critical step. Relations with Russia in the north were already tense. Now, with this decision taken by Norway, the relationship between Russia and northern European countries is getting worse. Let's explore this brave step of Norway together and see how Russia was shaken by this strong wind coming from Scandinavia and how this strong wind swept Vladimir Putin's men away. Beyond Ukraine, Washington and its European allies are ratcheting up pressure on Russia, including in the Arctic and Baltic Sea regions. In the past few years of East-West crisis, the U.S. military has vastly expanded its presence inside Norway, whose western border runs 1,400 miles along the North Atlantic Ocean and merges above the Arctic Circle with Russia. The Pentagon has created high-paying jobs and contracts amid some local controversy by investing hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade and expand American Navy and Air Force facilities in Norway. The new works included, most importantly, an advanced synthetic aperture radar far up north that was capable of penetrating deep into Russia and came online just as the American intelligence community lost access to a series of long-range listening sites inside China. Norway's air station north of the Arctic Circle is to become a regional hub for surveillance of Russia. Details on the joint project between the United States, Britain, and Norway were provided earlier this month in comments by Norwegian Minister of Defense, Bjørn Arild Gram, who said that the base will host US P-8a Poseidon surveillance aircraft. Two Arctic bases, Evans and the Ramsund Naval Base, are the subject of an upgraded bilateral defense cooperation agreement between Washington and Oslo. They are classified as agreed areas, which grant U.S. forces unimpeded access to the bases and exclusive rights to certain parts of them. The agreement provides for U.S. jurisdiction over all U.S. Army personnel in the country, including for crimes they commit off-duty, and even over Norwegian citizens who come into contact with the agreed areas. Washington initiated talks on the bilateral agreement, and the Biden administration said the deal was an invariable requirement for further U.S. investment in Norwegian facilities. The opportunity to store equipment and material in advance, which is included in the Norwegian-American agreement, clearly expresses the American commitment on agreed areas in Norway. Defense Minister Graham said at Venice the aim is to develop cooperation between Norwegian, British, and American P-8 maritime surveillance aircraft in accordance with the investments that are made in the Norwegian Armed Forces long-term plan. These include 5 P-8a Poseidon surveillance aircraft bought by Norway, which will work with British Poseidons to search for and destroy underwater targets, that is, submarines. Evans also hosts Norway's US-produced F-35 fighter jets. Ramsund will serve as a maritime logistics hub for large-scale military activities in the region by the US and other NATO powers. Graham said, in the current long-term plan for the defense sector, it's planned that the Ramsund Naval Base will have an expanded role as the Navy's base in the north, and that the base is further developed to support the Navy and allies, including expanded key facilities, storage, ammunition, logistics, and maintenance. Our NATO allies train and exercise regularly in Norway, something that may also involve periodic presence in connection with logistics support. Increased cooperation with the U.S. and other allies at Evans and Ramsund is desired and will provide economies of scale and increased operative effect. Meanwhile, in the shadow of Washington-Oslo cooperation against Russia's aggression, the tension between Norway and Russia is escalating, with the measures taken by the Norwegian administration against the Russian embassy. Norway has declared 15 people persona non grata working at the Russian embassy in Oslo. Russian diplomats are defined as members of intelligence services that engage in activities incompatible with their diplomatic status. These diplomats are required to leave the country, the Norwegian government website reported. Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt described the deportation as an important step in countering and reducing the level of Russian intelligence activity. Norway aims to protect its national interests by deporting 15 Russian diplomats it accuses of espionage in Norway's message. Moscow is cited as the main source of espionage threat for Oslo. It was also noted that the country would welcome diplomats from Russia, but Russian intelligence services would not be allowed to work under diplomatic guise. Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt announced that they will not issue visas to intelligence officers who apply for visas to Norway. Anniken Huitfeldt did not elaborate on whether the government's decision was based on a particular event. Huitfeldt stated that the country's internal intelligence service will make the necessary statement on the subject. The Norwegian newspaper VG wrote that the number of expelled Russian diplomats was so high for the first time. The newspaper stated that about 40 people work at the Russian embassy in Oslo and the Kirkenes and Barentsburg consulates, including the deported diplomats. The retaliatory response to Norway's decision to expel the Russian diplomats came without delay. The Russian embassy in Norway described this critical decision as an extremely hostile step and announced that it would retaliate against it. 15 Norwegian diplomats are expected to be expelled, according to Russia's threat of retaliation. Minister Huitfeldt reacted to the statements of retaliation. Huitfeldt said Russia has no reason to respond. We have Norwegian diplomats in Russia, but none of them are intelligence officers. Stating that his country wants to establish normal diplomatic relations with Russia, Huitfeldt stated that they do not want people who claim to be diplomats and are actually intelligence officers. In addition, Norway expelled 3 Russian diplomats last year for allegedly being intelligence officers. On the other hand, blows are coming from Norway to Russia, one after another. Norway, which expelled 15 Russian diplomats, also decided to impose new sanctions on Russia. Norway has launched a new set of sanctions against President Putin and the Russian regime. These sanctions reflected the EU's 10th package of sanctions adopted by the EU on February 25, 2023. The sanctions are becoming more and more extensive and represent a strong and clear European response to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Norway's powerful energy sector has been a major beneficiary, together with the United States, of sanctions on Russia and the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. Norwegian natural gas exports to Europe rose 3.3% in 2022. Deliveries to Germany shot up to 11% year-over-year. Norway has complied with the EU sanctions against Russia with several adaptations. Sanctions are implemented in Regulation 1076 of the 15th of August 2014 on restrictive measures regarding actions that undermine or threaten Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, independence, and stability. These sanctions imposed by Norway, including an import ban and a price cap on crude oil and petroleum products, are hitting the Russian economy hard. In February, Russia's oil sector tax revenues fell by 46% compared to the pre-war period. On the other hand, with the departure of Russia, Norway became the energy champion of Europe. Norway is now the continent's largest supplier of natural gas, and last year, the country's energy earnings increased by $100 billion. The new front line for Europe's energy security is a modest office building overlooking a fjord in Stavanger, Norway. Inside, a company called Petoro manages 36 of Europe's largest oil and gas fields on Norway's oil-rich continental shelf. These operations in Norwegian waters, marked by massive offshore platforms and wells twisting thousands of feet below the ground, have helped Europe heat its homes and generate electricity since the start of Russia's war in Ukraine. While Russia restricted its natural gas exports last year, Norway accelerated this export and is now the main fuel supplier to Europe. Norway also supplies more oil to its neighbors, replacing embargoed Russian oil. In short, the war in Ukraine helped add nearly $100 billion to Norway's oil and gas earnings. In other words, Oslo both supported Kiev in this war and strengthened its economy much more by taking advantage of Moscow's mistakes. On the other hand, Norway, a small country bordering Russia, is not a member of the European Union, but listens closely to its neighbors. After the war broke out, Brussels and European countries, mainly Germany, heavily dependent on Russian gas, leaned on Oslo for help. Norway already produces high volumes of gas and transports it to Northern Europe via subsea pipelines. But the Oslo government has allowed additional production. Energy companies made adjustments that increased gas production at the expense of oil. The result was an 8% increase in Norway's gas production last year, making Norway a source of about a third of the gas consumed in Europe. Norway has collected nice financial rewards for coming to Europe's aid. Petoro, 20, made nearly $50 billion, nearly 3 times its 2021 earnings, as energy companies like Shell and BP posted record profits last year. According to the estimates of the Oslo government, revenues from oil and gas contributed $125 billion to the Norwegian state in 2022. It seems that the Ukrainian war helped boost the Norwegian economy while undermining the Russian economy. Norway, on the other hand, seems to have sworn to corner Russia in addition to the political and economic tensions. Norway is following the Russians on the coasts. Norway watches cautiously with Russian submarines and planes accelerating Arctic patrols. NATO ally Norway has announced that it has increased the number of maritime patrols near vital undersea gas pipelines off its coast. In addition, Norway released a video clip of the growing Russian threat in the Arctic. Videos provided by the Royal Norwegian Air Force provided critical data near a maze of undersea pipelines carrying large quantities of natural gas to Europe and telecommunications cables connecting European countries. There is a high-stakes cat-and-mouse game between the two armies and the Russian attack submarines patrolling the area. The chief of the Royal Norwegian Navy noted that military activity around Norway has increased in the high north in the North Atlantic. The president stated that Russian submarines work differently than they did 10 years ago. The increase in military activity came as tensions escalated between NATO and Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. After a drastic decline in Russian natural gas flows to Europe, Norway has replaced Russia as the continent's largest supplier. Since an unexplained attack on the Nord Stream gas pipeline linking Russia and Germany last year, Norway, backed by NATO allies, has increased the security of its vast network of offshore pipelines and communication cables. Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt said in an interview in Oslo that after explosions, we actually increased our presence on these facilities. The submarine, naval, and air capabilities of the Russian Northern Fleet are largely unaffected by the war in Ukraine. Analysts say that Russia has invested heavily in its submarine fleet, making its boats quieter and more deadly. The new Belgorod submarine is designed to carry huge 25-meter-long nuclear torpedoes, as well as smaller mini-submarines capable of rescue or research. In summary, we'll wait and see if the escalation of tensions between Russia and Norway will affect Russia's war performance. You can support us with the Super Thanks button below. The Black Sea has long been the scene of a rivalry between Russia and the West, strengthened by the Ukraine war. The giant pond on Europe's southeast flank has long been an arena of international competition between the US and its European allies on the one hand, and Russia and its sphere of influence on the other. This dynamic has been strengthened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The collision of a Russian Su-27 fighter jet with an American surveillance drone the other day was a stark reminder to many countries operating in and around the Black Sea of the region's potential to be a flashpoint. At this point, The attitude of the US administration and the Russian administration further clarified some facts in the world order. The balance was fragile, but the US administration is professionally keeping the balance against this crazy move. Let's examine in detail the event that brought the Black Sea to its flashpoint. As is known, at the beginning of this week, an event occurred that would increase the temperature in the Black Sea to the maximum level. The incident took place amid escalating tensions between Russia and the United States as the Biden administration tried to isolate Moscow over sanctions and its invasion of Ukraine. A Russian Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jet collided with the US Air Force MQ-9 Reaper user air system over the Black Sea in the early morning. Russia forced the plane to land in the Black Sea in what US forces called an unsafe and unprofessional interception. US military officials said the unarmed Reaper drone was flying on a typical reconnaissance mission when it was captured by two Russian Su-27 fighter jets about 100 kilometers southwest of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, which Russia uses as a base to launch devastating attacks. The encounter of the US drone performing a typical reconnaissance mission with Russian warplanes escalated tensions between the Kremlin and the White House. The collision occurred just after 7 a.m. as two Russian Su-fighter jets flew into the MQ-9 Reaper drone over international waters west of Crimea, the U.S. European Command said in a statement. The statement also said the Russian pilots were trying to disrupt the U.S. plane before it collided several times before the collision. The Su-27 were reported to have dumped fuel on the MQ-9 and flew in front of it in an unprofessional manner. Later, one of the Russian fighters crashed into the propeller of the drone. It resulted in U.S. forces having to drop the MQ-9 in international waters. The incident shows a lack of competence as well as being insecure and unprofessional. After the collision, the Russian Su-27 is believed to have landed at an air base in occupied Crimea. It's not known whether there was any damage to the Su-27. Russia's defense ministry, on the other hand, denied any collision and claimed that the drone, which cost $32 million, was shot down due to the mishandling of the pilot. Also, the Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the U.S. plane was flying with the transponders turned off. Transponders are communication devices that allow aircraft to be tracked. In another development, Russia will try to find and recover the remains of a U.S. military drone shot down in the Black Sea. With that, Russia plans to benefit from the technology of the unmanned aerial vehicle. The White House took steps to protect its military property after an advanced U.S. Air Force drone collided with Russian warplanes in international airspace. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said in a statement that the United States does not want the wreckage of the downed MQ-9 Reaper drone to fall into the hands of anyone outside the United States. For this, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria, which have a coast on the Black Sea, should take action to save the Allied aircraft. Among these three countries, Turkey is the first candidate to save the U.S. plane in terms of its Navy power and Black Sea influence and also its relations with Russia. In other words, the USA has to recover the MQ-9 together with Turkey. The confrontation of other countries with Russia in the middle of the Black Sea has the potential to further escalate the current tension. On the other hand, the unprofessional behavior of Russian planes and the statements made by the Russian Ministry of Defense are quite remarkable and reckless. The only question that comes to mind following this incident is, did Vladimir Putin go crazy? The next move of Putin, which caused the tension in the Black Sea to rise, is a matter of curiosity. As is known, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has escalated. The tension between Moscow and Washington and the Black Sea has begun to come to the fore even more in this time period. Russia blockaded Ukrainian ships in its port. However, Ukraine was able to export its grain by sea under an agreement signed last July between the two warring countries. At the same time, Ukraine attacked Russian naval ships in the Black Sea and in the port. In April, a Ukrainian missile sank Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. The war also mobilized the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in particular by strengthening ties between Washington and members of the Russian border, including Poland and the Baltic states. NATO countries have poured billions of dollars in military aid to support Ukraine. However, the alliance tried to avoid direct conflict with Russia, a nuclear-armed state. NATO countries have consistently avoided engaging in a direct war with Russia. However, we will wait and see if the latest event in the Black Sea skies can change this stance. Now let's take a closer look at the geography of the Black Sea. The Black Sea is larger than California, with 6 countries on its shores. 3 of these, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria, are NATO members, while others, such as Ukraine, are friends of the alliance, which has long felt the Black Sea is necessary for efforts to contain Russia. Turkey has a tremendous influence on the Black Sea as it controls the 2 straits, the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, which ships must cross in order to cross between the Black Sea and other global waterways. The 1936 Montreux Convention gives Turkey the right to close the straits to most military traffic in times of war. This was a mandate that Russia used after its invasion of Ukraine last year. The Black Sea is crucial to Russian President Vladimir Putin's efforts to expand Moscow's influence and has been a focus of instability resulting from it. In recent years, the periphery has been the scene of Russia's war with Georgia. In 2008, political upheavals against Russian-backed leaders in Ukraine and Belarus, and a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia in 2020, eventually mediated by Moscow. But Mr. Putin's biggest power play around the Black Sea was Russia's invasion of Crimea, a strategic peninsula that it seized from neighboring Ukraine in 2014. This strengthened Russia's position in the Black Sea and gave it control of Russia's only hot water port, Sebastopol. Russia's enemies responded by intensifying their own military maneuvers around the Black Sea. NATO members made regular surveillance flights, and the US and Britain frequently sent warships, although international conventions barred them from staying more than 21 days. The subsequent Russian invasion of Ukraine caused both sides to further expand their maneuvers in the region. In addition, Turkey's closure of the straits to most military traffic in order to prevent Russia from supporting its naval forces against Ukraine with ships coming from other places also prevented ships from the United States and other NATO countries from entering the Black Sea. But the air is still clear, so NATO members have stepped up surveillance flights over and around the city, and Russia has responded with warplanes as a show of strength. With the recent tensions, Turkey is becoming indispensable for NATO in the Black Sea and beyond. So let's take a look at the factors that make Turkey indispensable. Ankara has been a calming and healing balm for the world since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. Whatever the outcome of the ground war, the Russian Navy will remain barren in the Black Sea for the foreseeable future. Ukraine has the potential to become an important Black Sea naval power on its own. From the smoke and dust of war, Turkey emerged as an important global player by underlining the importance of Ankara in maintaining regional peace. Ankara's use of authority given by the 1936 Montreux Convention to close the Turkish Straits to foreign warships going to conflict zones once again reminded Ankara of its importance for the region. Turkey became the dominant naval power in the northern waters. This is the new reality in the region for policymakers at NATO. Russia's attack on Ukraine is a reminder of Turkey's importance in the Black Sea region for 3 reasons. For example, it is in NATO's interest that one of its members has sovereign control over the Turkish Straits, which has directly affected Russia's action against Ukraine. In addition, Russia is legally prevented from reinforcing its Black Sea fleet with ships from the Pacific, Baltic, or Northern fleets, since no ship can enter the Black Sea. Turkey's closure of the straits to Russian ships. You can support us with the super thanks button below. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Our contents are carefully prepared by our expert team. Thank you for watching us. Today, there is a lot of news from the Donetsk region. Here, Russians conducted a massive mechanized assault on all Ukrainian positions south of Avdiivka in an attempt to draw Ukrainians' attention to this line and bridge the Ukrainian defense to the north of Avdiivka. However, despite the initial partial success, Russian forces were too slow to react to the new developments on the ground, which led to the inevitable defeat. Last time I told you that Russian forces abruptly reinforced the Avdiivka direction with heavy equipment, fixed Ukrainian troops in the south, and then delivered their main blow to the north of Avdiivka, entering the village of Stepov. I also told you that Ukrainians urgently engaged the reserves in Birds and sent a tank unit to push the Russians out. The freshest reports suggest that the battles here were extremely difficult. Avdiivka media reported that Russian forces were employing a greater number of aviation units in the area to support this operations and were also increasingly using S-300 Ha-59 and other missiles. Some sources started reporting that Russians have already consolidated control over Stepov and are assaulting Birds. Some sources amplified these claims and said that Russians are also attacking in the direction of Orlivka. However, in reality, Russians were just engaging on the territory of Stupovy with the Ukrainian forces that were sent from Berdychev and Orlivka. Russians had a very limited time to establish full control over the settlement because of the difficulties of sustaining the offensive on the other side of the railway embankment and under the fire from the hills. Judging by the latest reports, Russians failed to provide the necessary enforcements timely, which allowed the Ukrainians to get closer to the railways and establish fire control over the area, which they used for getting across the rails. Today, Russian military-affiliated sources confirmed that the fights are taking place east of Stepov. The footage was also released today showing how Ukrainian RPV squad sneaks close to the enemy positions, quickly unloads the man-portable thermobaric rocket launchers, and takes cover behind the houses. Geolocated footage also shows that Russians are trying to get closer to Avdiivka from the northeast because Ukrainian drone operators from the 110th Mechanized Brigade started spotting and destroying Russians in the three lines in front of Tirricone. However, for now, it is clear that Russians are not prioritizing frontal assaults on Avdiivka and are just conducting relatively light reconnaissance. When it comes to the southern part of the region, after an unsuccessful attempt to move around Ukrainian positions and attack them from the flanks, Russian forces were once again forced to attack Ukrainian positions on the hills in front of Vojny. Geolocated footage shows that Russians engaged at least 3 tanks. The video shows that after 2 tanks were quickly destroyed, the third tank immediately started to back down. Yesterday, the Ukrainian military spokesman stated that over the preceding 2 days, Russians lost about 3 companies' worth of inventory in assaults on Avdiivka. The southern part of Avdiivka is primarily stormed by the DPR forces, more specifically, the 1st Slavic Brigade, and a few days ago, one of the soldiers from this brigade effectively confirmed this claims and said that the formations had suffered heavy losses and conducted assaults without artillery support. The Institute for the Study of War evaluated the situation and stated that the rapid increase in the tempo of Russian operations has likely led to major losses, which will result in a rapid culmination of the battle for Avdiivka with the subsequent loss of initiative in this direction. Overall, Russian forces prepared a sophisticated plan of how to capitalize on the recent gains around Krasnohorivka and try to immediately take off deep into a pocket. The first stages of implementation were reasonably successful, as Russians did manage to breach several Ukrainian lines of fortifications in front of Opytn and draw Ukrainian attention to the south. However, They failed to establish full control over Stupovy at once, failed to timely reinforce the assault units, which is why they lost the bridgehead and were pushed back east of the settlement.